Hey, this has been awesome. It's been really helpful. One of the phrases that you talked about was disarming. And we talked a lot tonight about disarming relationally and walking that out with people. But one of the first phrases you said was that the letter that he wrote was disarming to you. I'd love to know, just practically in starting those conversations with people, what are some of those disarming questions? How do you get your foot in the door just even saying, I love you?
Yeah. Ken, if you meet Ken, you'll know, he is just somebody who bathes everything with prayer. And I don't know, I've had, missionary friends in Africa, they wouldn't even think about, turning the key on the ignition without praying, and, we just jump in the car and drive on a highway, but Ken is that way. So he had prayed about that letter, and he had an elder in the church who brought the editorial to his attention and said, we've got to do something about this. She is trouble. And Ken said, maybe Floy and I should have her over for dinner. And I don't know if you know anything, about the way sort of Reformed churches work, but I can almost picture this just, almost like an edible battle going on between the young elder and the old pastor, and the young elder's thinking, this guy's so out of touch. But Ken's letter was really, what was interesting is he started out by, first of all, not lambasting the article and not lauding it either. So it was disarming because, I have these two boxes. And I am an efficient type A personality. I don't like a cluttered desk. I get a letter and it goes somewhere. And this one is like, no, hate those kind of letters. So it was just disarming because it neither lauded what I did nor destroyed it. But he told me a little bit about why he read the Bible, and he wanted to know if I had ever read the Bible and if I believed in God. And he described Jesus as someone who entered into history rather than someone who emerged from it. And he shared with me something important. And I was intrigued by that. I was intrigued because I really thought people read the Bible for a rule book of do's and don'ts. I did. I just thought it was like a very long-winded rule book, but, it was just a rule book. And so it had never occurred to me, any of that. Also, by asking me the question of whether I believed in God, there are certain questions that I had gone my whole life and nobody had ever asked. That was it was a tender question. And I loved the fact that, he had this, and he still does, that perfect kind of old guy handwriting, back in the days when you learned handwriting. I went to Catholic school, 18 years of handwriting, and I could still feel Sister Mary Margaret, give me a smack for it. So, it just didn't take, but there's just something about it that I really liked, and it occurred to me, because I really do value diversity. I always have. And it occurred to me that I was no longer living in a world of diversity. At my Thanksgiving table, just last year, there were 14 lesbians with a PhD in the humanities. We were all white. Not a lot of diversity there. And yet we talked about diversity a lot. And so I was intrigued at the thought of what some of those answers might hold. I really didn't know if I believed in God. I called myself an atheist, but I hadn't. How sometimes you can't answer a question unless someone else asks it? The gospel is dialogic. It's not just something that you ruminate around in your head. Community is dialogic. It's not something you do solo. Reconciliation, love, those are all dialogic. And so I was just intrigued by those questions. I was also baffled by this idea that Jesus entered into history. In fact, I read it a few times thinking, that is the wackiest thing I have ever heard. Yeah, I was a historical materialist. I believe people emerged from history, and then, and then you just have the shakedown of whether, going up or down. So it did strike me that I could learn something from Ken. I just didn't think I would learn to love the Lord. from Ken. But it did, I mean, he was a learned, and is a learned man, and he knew stuff I didn't know. And I needed to read the Bible, and I just figured he'd be a good guy. So those are some of the things. Nothing you could put into a program. If you can't imagine, a new evangelism explosion based on, how to write a letter to, English professors who, and I don't think, he even said, I said, did you fret over that letter? And he said, no, I just, I just wanted to get some ideas out and, really just wanted to make connection. So, he was prayerful, but the Lord used that. So at first I threw the letter away because I couldn't file it. And then I dug it out of the department's recycling bin late that night. You know what I mean? Oh man, the shame. But it definitely had an effect on me. But going to his house the first time even had more of an effect. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
A great question. Who's next?
Thank you so much just for being here.
My pleasure.
And you're so just disarming and just wonderful to listen to. And I'm just so amazed on how God has worked in your life and what you've done, for just a testimony. And I guess my question is that we all have our sins and we struggle with, we repent, and we fall, and repent, and God is so forgiving. And so I guess my thought is, for you, having changed your life around, do you find yourself ever still struggling with same-sex attraction?
That's a good question. For all the years that I was writing the book, and I'm a mom by adoption, and Kent and I, the wonderful thing about being a pastor's wife is you spend so much time with your husband. It's not like he would go off and I wouldn't see him for 14 hours a day. We were always involved in things together, and so it was a real time of healing and restoration, and the Lord, so during that season, what I was noticing is that even if I wanted to go back and reconnect with people, or sometimes you just wonder, hey, how is so and so? Really, the Lord had burned those bridges. And so I couldn't go back. And so I'm, pastor's wife, mom, adoption, foster care, writing this, little book at night. And I really thought, wow, that's just a part of my life and it's over. And then I started counseling people. And I realized that, there's actually a healthy way to think about same-sex attraction. I mean, I don't know what to say about that, but I had experienced it in a very unhealthy way, in a way that was that used another person physically and sexually. But my affinity for women, God has used that mightily in counseling. My just general enjoyment of being in the presence of even struggling women who are struggling with things that I'm not struggling with, is a bridge. The fact that I just delight in and enjoy and appreciate the gifts that God has given women is not a sin. And that kind of struck me, because I was a little afraid about all that. Now, Kent and I, when you have a public ministry, one of the challenges of a public ministry is, it's like you have that big target sign right around your head and it says, Satan, right here, should be here. So when it became clear that I was not, at least for this season, going to just be, a pastor's wife and a homeschool mom, but I was going to have a public ministry. Kent and I sat down and we've always talked about, well, what are the boundaries, what are the possibilities, what are the issues. So to answer your question, I have not struggled in a sexual way, which might be, I think that might be how you're asking. It hasn't been that I have not struggled with lust, but I'm also not leaving myself wide open. Does that make sense? So, we have some, Kent and I have a very, just an open, good relationship on these issues. I can't imagine what it would be like to be in a marriage with someone and not be able to do full disclosure about your sin. The other thing that has happened too, that has given me some perspective, is that as a pastor's wife, when I attributed a lot of my sexual issues to same-sex attraction. And, it's funny how we develop certain file folders that we put things in. Yeah. Right, so sometimes, as a mother by adoption, we're like, I wonder if that's adoption. Well, sometimes Johnny picks his nose because he's got something to pick. Sometimes it's not adoption. And the same is true. Sorry, the same is true. For some of these things. So the other thing that happens, as a pastor's wife, is you end up doing counseling with your husband, with married couples. It was very startling to realize that pretty much everybody's sexually broken. I mean, I don't want to pop anybody's bubble here, but if you haven't figured out that you need to crucify your sexuality for the Lord, you are in big trouble. So that was a really interesting, just a reality that, maybe my file folder isn't quite right. Now, I would say, to be, I would say that I am somebody who just had a greater degree of sexual fluidity. I am not somebody who, on her 9th birthday, realized that I only wanted to be in the company of women. My lesbian identity crept up pretty slowly on me and pretty late in life. So, and as I've reflected back on it, and I'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, homosexuality is a fruit of something else. Well, I would say mine was more a fruit of pride than lust. And so, in some ways, I don't struggle anybody can struggle with anything, and so I'm always hesitant to say publicly, I don't struggle, as soon as you say that, right? But, for me, because pride was really the big problem, the desire to be fully independent, that was really the avenue more, my road to lesbianism. And so I tend to, do I still struggle with pride? Absolutely. Now, by God's grace, God has given me a husband who is a godly head of my household. And I think, maybe that's something that wouldn't necessarily be obvious from the conversation that we've just had. But the only reason I'm here is because Kent wants me to do this, within reason. But if Kent didn't want me to do this, I wouldn't be here. We have, what they call a complementarian relationship. Kent is the head of my household, and I am, in the book, I shared the sermon that the pastor read at our wedding, and I've had friends who are part of the biblical feminist movement. I've had people just tell me that they cried in agony over that it was just, oh, what a loss. One of the challenges we have as Christians is sometimes we use the same vocabulary in different dictionaries. And then without meaning to, we're talking past each other. So it's important as Christians coming together to use God's vocabulary and God's dictionary. What is the difference between temptation and indwelling sin? Those are different things, and I would not have known it if I hadn't read John Owen on the subject. So he has a book on sin and temptation, and Justin Taylor has the edition of it that I really like. I recommend it to everybody. I think it's very helpful. But here's what you don't need to be. You don't need to be afraid of yourself. You know, if you're a Christian who struggles with same-sex attraction, you are not a dangerous person. You know, I want you in my life. You know, you are not dangerous. In fact, if you're a Christian who struggles with same-sex attraction, you're committed to celibacy, you're committed to living a godly life and a holy life, you're a hero of the faith because you have a better clarity on the sin that is grabbing you by the neck than most other people. So we need to not make people feel, because it's not accurate, that their struggles define them. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Of course, he surveyed the Bible and came out realizing what biblical sex
Sexuality,
is.
yeah.
And that, you know, there's only one legitimate in God's eyes, and that's a one man, one woman covenant marriage relationship. I think one of the things I struggle with, as I touched on, is that how, when someone asks you, or me, let me just say, I fear some gay friend asking me what I think of gay marriage. And I can honestly say, you know, I don't have a problem with gay civil rights in certain, you know, certain aspects of all of that. But I stumble because I can't support gay biblical marriage. And more than that, I fear that the radical gay left will stop at nothing more than to try to close down churches who won't perform them. And I think that then touches on, you know, on freedom of religion. It's just like the hot dog thing.
Would you like me to answer the question
Yes.
of how I deal with the question of gay
Yes.
marriage? And let me too recommend Christopher and Angela Yuan's book. It is a beautiful book. I am a bookish kind of gal, as you've probably gathered. I have read thousands of books, and that book has affected me like none other. So it is a powerful book. Often I am asked, what should I do about gay marriage? And sometimes it's fairly aggressive. Sometimes someone in the audience will say, how dare you not support gay marriage? And then, of course, we have people who are arguing from a theological perspective. You see, it's one thing to argue, to hear it from a secular perspective, but then you have the church saying, well, but maybe Romans 1 didn't really mean homosexuality the way we mean homosexuality. Maybe 1 Corinthians 6 didn't really mean homosexuality the way we mean. And it can be sort of dizzying. So I'll share with you two things that I say to people because I believe them. I believe, just as Ken modeled for me, that Christians are called to be good neighbors. And good neighbors never throw a roadblock between an image bearer of a holy God and God himself. You may lose friends over that. I may lose friends over that. But to throw a roadblock between an image bearer of a holy God and God himself is a hateful thing to do. And so I will not do that. I was speaking at a large church, and after the church at the book signing, an older woman came up to me and very, very sweetly said, you know, I'm 75 years old, and I have heard the gospel. And I have been in a committed, married, lesbian relationship for 50 years, and I have children and grandchildren. Now what? Now here's what I know. The blood's on my hands. I helped create the world that made it possible. So, at least for me, no more blood on my hands. Now, I think it's important for Christians to have also some tools to think through this. Denny Burke has a book out called, I think it's What is the Purpose of Sex? No, What is the Meaning of Sex? And he has a very important chapter. And it's all, love God with your body, love God with your marriage, love God with your singleness. So the chapter headings are all about love God. And then there's this chapter that says, love God with your biblical hermeneutic. And I think every Christian should think about that. We are called to rightly divide the word. Are we loving God with our hermeneutic? Likely we've never put loving God and hermeneutic in the same sentence before, right? So you'll have to read the chapter. But I think it's important because we need tools and principles that are not reactive, right? And so that's why I'm going into the what if. You know what? What if? What if we're stoned to death? Then don't waste your stoning. I know the answer to that question. You do too. You don't need to worry. Sometimes slippery slope arguments are, they create a lot of bad analogies. They just do. So I wouldn't go there. If God calls you to persecution, then you will honor God with the way you're being persecuted, by his strength and to his glory. But that's not what's happening right now. What's happening right now is that we have a biblically illiterate world, one that we helped create. That might be a hard thing to swallow, but it's not an unbeliever's responsibility to be a Bible reader. It just isn't. So we live in that world. We are part to blame for it, and now we need to double time on some things. Does that answer your question?
I was wondering, how do you respond to people that are actively gay and say they're a Christian? Which,
right.
And what's a roadblock when you say? When you say what does that practically look like when you say Christians are good neighbors, but not a roadblock? What is that? What's a practical? Could you give us a practical example?
Well, I would say Christians supporting gay marriage would be Christians throwing a roadblock between an image bearer and a holy God.
So if somebody asked you, say, we're getting, for instance, a friend's recently, we're getting married, would you go to that wedding?
No. People ask me that a lot, and I don't think the real question is would I go to the wedding. I think the question is, should I go to the wedding?
Right.
And, this is where it's not exactly, this is where Christians need to take seriously the church, because the cost of that yes or that no. I do not. And you need your elders and your pastors praying over that question and giving you godly insight, because there will be costs either way. And you need to count the costs. So, but if you don't have a church, for many, many Christians, church has just been a place you visit on Sunday mornings. And if you do not have a place that you have made a covenant relationship with, church is not a man-made institution. It's a God-made institution. And if you are not in covenant with that God-made institution, you're a sailboat with any way to control that sail. You're in trouble. And so, again, get your oxygen mask on before you get somebody else's. If you don't have your house in order, your house of worship in order, do that now. Because that is something that you do need personal counsel on. Now, the question of gay Christian, I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, because some of that is terminology. But what's in a word? Oh, I don't know, everything, right? So I don't like the term gay Christian. I also don't like the term ex-gay Christian, by the way, because An adjectival modifier, that's what that is, gay or ex-gay, its job is to change the meaning of the noun it modifies. You want to do that? Okay, because here's what you're doing. You're saying, Holy Spirit, don't touch me there. You don't want to do that. And you don't want somebody you love to do that either. You may be a Christian who struggles with any manner of sin in this life, but you don't need to create an identity out of that. God is not asking you to do that. And so, I will challenge people on their identification. I hope lovingly. Now, if the question is, can you be a practicing gay, can you be a practicing homosexual and be a Christian? You know, that's a little more complex. But here's the problem. Can you be a Christian who calls God a liar? Because if you say you do not sin, you call God a liar. Well, that's not looking so good, is it? Can you believe without repenting? Well, that's not looking so good either. But can your life be so messed up, we talked about before, that sin is clobbering you faster than sanctification is buoying you up, but that before the foundations of the world, God chose you and set you apart, but your life is a mess and it doesn't look like it? Yes, that can happen. You know, which is why we simply cannot judge, we cannot assess the salvation of others, but it's also another reason to really pray for your elders and your pastors, because even though they are finite and limited men, they have to make a judgment call about church membership, about godly standing within the church. These are not easy matters. I'm glad I don't have to make a call on those things. I really am. I really am. Does that answer